On August 3, 1996, a 34-year-old homeless man by the name of Lane Holdway was looking for a place to stay for the night in the small community of Strasburg, Colorado, when he found an old cement silo that hadn't been used in years. What took place in that silo over the next several days was extremely disturbing, rocking the small community to its core. This is his story. I'm originally from Massachusetts and had been making my way out to California. Always dreamed of ending up on the West Coast. I had a small family once but lost them in an accident years ago. Since then, I've been aimlessly wandering, trying to figure out what my next move should be. I'd been catching rides on freight trains, slowly making my way out west. I was in no rush, so I'd stop in random towns and stay there for a while, then continue on when I felt like it. I remember well the first day I arrived in Strasburg. It was late in the afternoon and the train started slowing down just enough for me to hop off. I was hungry and tired of being on the train, so I planned to spend a few days before continuing on. As I got off the train and looked around, I could see a field of corn in front of me and a tall cement silo at the end of the field. I thought, this is good, I'll grab some corn to eat and spend the night in the silo. I was never a fan of sleeping directly under the stars. I always tried getting some kind of shelter if possible. As I made my way through the cornfield, I could see it was sweet corn and not fig corn. This was good, as I was starving. I've eaten filled corn before, but it's hard and not good to eat. I grabbed a good amount, stuffed them into my backpack, then continued walking towards the silo. As I got close, I could see a 6-high "Welcome to Dark Rot Legends ... where fear takes form and shadows tell their stories. Let's begin." Fence had been built around it with multiple signs that read "Keep out." I thought that was odd, no matter, though. I shrugged it off and proceeded to climb over the fence and walked towards the door that led inside. I could see there was a padlock on the door, but someone had left it unlocked. When I grabbed the handle to open the door, the most disturbing images flashed through my mind. I saw the bodies of dozens of children under the ground, all of them with horrified looks on their faces, each one fighting to get to the surface. I quickly let go of the handle and said aloud, "What the hell?" Something like that had never happened to me before, and it scared the living hell out of me. It seemed so real. I've never been a religious man and I don't believe in otherworldly things, so this kind of shook me. I ended up thinking it was just my mind, because every night when I close my eyes to sleep, I see the bodies of my family as they were in the accident. The door creaked as I slowly opened it. As I stepped inside, I immediately noticed it smelled very different. It was like stepping into a different world. The smell was borderline pungent, but for some reason I was able to tolerate it. I set my backpack down as I looked up and thought just how big the inside was. I could see on the far side there appeared to be a chute that went to the top. I walked over and looked up into it. I stood there for a bit looking when I saw something at the top moving. This made me jump back. It took a minute for my eyes to adjust, but all of a sudden I could see a large owl staring down at me. It then spread its wings and flew out of the opening at the top of the chute. That was the closest I've ever been to an owl, and couldn't remember the last time I'd even seen an owl. Seeing it staring down at me like it was gave me the creeps. I got the feeling it was staring into my soul with gone. Its face kept replaying in my mind. As I turned and walked over to my backpack, I sat down and started to eat the corn I'd taken. My stomach was growling something awful because I hadn't eaten anything since the day before. As I sat there eating my corn, memories of my family entered my mind, as they did every day. I cried so much over the years. It was hard to cry anymore and couldn't remember the last time I actually did it. Felt like someone reached in and ripped out my tear ducts. I think, though, I was just past the point of crying and was now deep in despair. I thought about ending my life countless times and came close several times, but for some reason I never did follow through with it. I think it was because I didn't have enough courage after finishing a few years Of course I spread out my sleeping bag and fell asleep. The next thing I remember was being awakened to the sound of them all hooting. It was pitch black in the silo now that the sun had gone down, and I wasn't sure what time it was as I didn't have a watch or a clock on me. Time didn't matter much to me. I started fumbling through my backpack looking for my flashlight when suddenly I heard something whispering from the dark lane, "Bring them to us, help. US, who's there?" Who said that? I yelled out in fear. I finally found my flashlight and quickly turned it on. I shined it in the area I thought the whispering was coming from, but there was nothing there. I then stood up, shining the light all around, but could only see my belongings. I remembered the owl hooting, which had woke me up, and decided to go look up the chute. I slowly crept over, shined the light up, and could see the owl's eyes glowing red as it glared down at me. I stood there for a while just staring into its eyes. It was like I couldn't look away. I finally came to, walked back over to my sleeping bag, laid down and fell asleep again. The next day I was awakened to the sun hitting my face as I'd left the door to the silo slightly ajar. As I sat up, a strange feeling overcame me. I felt like I was not myself. I'd had a lot of different feelings in my life, but this feeling was much darker and deeper than anything I'd ever felt. I sat there just staring at the wall of the silo for what must have been hours, because when I snapped out of whatever state I was in, I could tell the light coming in through the crack in the door had shifted quite a ways during that period of time. I don't remember much. It was like I was outside myself is the best way to describe it. As I stood up, I could feel my mouth and throat were very dry, and I was dying of thirst. My canteen was empty, but I remembered seeing a spigot on an irrigation pipe just outside the fence before climbing over. When I stepped outside and into the sun, the dark feeling I'd had suddenly went away. At the time I attributed it to being stuck in the dark silo by the position of the sun. I guessed it to be in the late afternoon. As I filled up my canteen and drank all I could think about was getting back into the silo. It was like an itch I couldn't scratch, and the only way to relieve it was to go back inside. I filled up my canteen one last time before going back. I vividly remember as I stepped back inside, the deep dark feeling instantly came back, but somehow I was comfortable with it. I sat back down and began to stare at the wall again. The next thing I can remember was feeling some type of warm liquid on my hands. I looked down at my hands to see what it was, but it was pitch black. I put my hands up to my nose to smell what it was, and it smelled metallic. I couldn't place exactly what it was. I then wiped my hands on my pants and laid back down. When I opened my eyes again, I could see it was dark outside. I noticed I was standing in the backyard of someone's house. The thought went through my mind, what am I doing here? What's going on? I tried making my body turn around to try and find the silo, but couldn't. It was like I wasn't in control of myself, and I was watching in myself from afar. Suddenly I heard the sounds of children talking and laughing as two of them came around the corner of the house into the backyard. When they saw me standing there, they quickly froze in place, not knowing what to do. Without hesitation, I walked over, grabbed them, put them under my arms, then proceeded to turn and walk away from the house. The children fought and screamed. As I carried them, one of them bit me so hard, took a piece of flesh out of my arm. As I walked through the cornfield, heading towards the silo, I thought, am I dreaming? Why can I not control what I'm doing? When I reached the fence surrounding the silo, I could see a hole had been cut out, allow me to walk through without having to climb it. I walked over to the door, kicked it open, and threw the children inside. Once I stepped inside, everything went black, and I don't remember what happened after that. The next thing I remember was immediately sitting up and looking down at my hands. I could see traces of red and knew instantly it was blood. I looked all around me and could see 3 spots on the ground that looked like they'd been dug recently. I shouted out, no, 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 as I ran over and started digging at the ground. With my hands, I frantically dug for a few minutes. When I came to some clothing clothing belonging to a child. I pulled it out of the ground and said, "What is this? Where is the body?" I continued digging, but there was nothing more. I then dug up the other clothing of the children. I stumbled back into the wall. As I stood there dumbfounded, am I losing my mind? I said to myself. I then ran outside to see if I could find anything, but there was nothing. I stopped when I came to the hole in the fence and wondered who could have made it, because it wasn't there when I first arrived. I could tell it was getting close to evening, and the urge to go back into the silo hit me again, so I turned and went back inside without giving it a second thought. Once inside, I laid back down and went to sleep. I started dreaming when I heard the whispering again. "Lane, bring them to us, help us." Without thinking, I stood up, walked outside, and proceeded to walk through the cornfield. As I was walking, part of my mind kept saying, "You need to stop, you need to stop." It didn't matter though, I just kept on going. It was like looking through a mask as I watched everything play out in front of me. I walked for a ways in the dark before coming to a small house that appeared to have no neighbors. When I reached the back door, I slowly and quietly reached out, grabbing the handle to see if it was unlocked, and it was. As I turned the handle and slowly opened the door, it made a slight creaking sound. When I stepped inside the house, it was then I looked down at my feet and noticed I was barefoot. I started walking through the house looking for bedrooms. When I came to the first room, I could see the door was open. As I stepped inside, I saw a small girl in bed sleeping. I walked over to her, put one hand over her mouth and picked her up. She tried screaming and fighting back, but the more she fought, the tighter my grip got. I turned and quietly made my way to the back door. Once outside, I quickly made my way through the cornfield, heading towards the silo. It was off in the distance, but I could see it in the moonlight, standing tall amongst the large field of corn. My only thought as I walked through the corn was take the girl to the silo, help them. That thought went through my mind over and over as I got closer. When I made it back like before, I threw the girl in and stepped inside. Only this time, as I said stepped foot on the ground, I didn't black out. The little girl was a few feet from me, crying as she asked, "Why are you doing this to me? I must help them, they need help," I replied. I then went over, grabbed her by the neck with both hands and squeezed as hard as I could as she fought to break free of my grip. My mind was screaming, "What the hell are you doing, Lane? Stop this now." I squeezed her little neck until she stopped moving. I picked up her lifeless body, carried her over to one of the empty holes I dug, put her inside and covered her up. I then went and laid down on my sleeping bag. I'm not sure how much later it was, but I jumped up as I heard the owl hooting from atop the chute. Everything that had happened came flooding into my mind. I looked over at the spot I'd buried the little girl and quickly ran over to it. I quickly started digging up the dirt, hoping it was all a dream. After a few minutes of digging, I could see the nightgown she'd been wearing. I pulled it out of the dirt and continued digging, but like before, there was nobody to be found. I fell back onto the ground, mentally and physically exhausted. At that point, I screamed out as I laid there, "Why is this happening?" I was sure I was going crazy. I didn't feel like moving, so I laid in that spot until the following morning. What happened next was something I'm not sure I'll ever believe. "Who are you? What the hell are you doing in this silo? I had it locked and fenced off for a reason," said a man from behind me, standing just outside the door. I turned back to see an old man step inside the silo. "What the oh no, it's begun again, hasn't it?" said the man as he stared at the children's clothing lying on the ground. "Some of the neighbor kids have come up missing, and this was the first thought that came to my mind. I didn't want to believe it," said the man. "What are you talking about?" I asked the man as I sat up facing him. Like I said, the silo was fenced off and locked for good reason. The ground in here is not what you think you're going to find. Is hard to believe, but over the last 100 years alone, at least a dozen children have been killed and buried in the ground in here. You see, the ground needs to feed, and it beckons some of those who set foot in here to feed it with the bodies of children. I should know, my family has Owned this land for quite some time. My father and I unwillingly fed the ground with the bodies of small children. It wasn't until after that it already happened. An old man from the Ute tribe stopped by our house one day. He said his grandfather told him a story of some ground in this area that was cursed and needed a fair feat on the flesh of small children. He said he didn't believe what his grandfather had told him for the longest time. Then he started hearing rumors of children going missing in that area. He did some digging into his people's history, and there were many stories that talked about the cursed ground here and children disappearing. His last words before he left were, "If you find the ground, stay off it and guard it." It was too late by then. Like I said, as my father and I had already fallen victim to its evil, we decided to build a silo and fence around it so it never happens again. "How did you get the padlock off?" the man asked. "It was unlocked when I got to the door," I replied. "Damn it, I'm going to have to seal the door shut permanently." Strange things like that have occurred here over the years, things that can't be explained. He said, "Did you see the owl?" he asked. "Yes." Within minutes after coming inside, I responded, "That same owl has been here since we've owned this land. That owl is somehow connected to the ground." He said, "What should I do?" I asked him. "Leave now and never come back. Tell no one. Not everyone that steps into the silo falls victim to its calls, but we can't take that chance," he replied. I then grabbed my belongings and left as quickly as I could. Before entering the cornfield heading towards the train tracks, I looked back as the old man was shutting and locking the door to the silo. 5 years later, Lane showed back up in Strasburg. He told a story in the grisly details of what happened to the families of the children he taken, killed, and buried in the silo. The families quickly called the authorities, but Lane took his own life before they could arrive. The authorities went to question the old man who told Lane the story, but he passed away 2 years before. His name was Daniel Roper, and his remaining family members claimed to have no idea what Daniel or Lane were talking about. The authorities dug up the ground in the silo and found the clothing of dozens of children, some dating back to the early 1900s. No bodies or traces of DNA were found in the soil, leaving only more questions than answers. The silo remains sealed and fenced to this day. For more scary horror stories, please subscribe. Thank you for joining Dark Rot Legends. Subscribe for more tales of terror. If you dare.